Hello to everyone. Welcome to Space Talks. I'm Zeta Chrysafaki. I'm an architect from Chania, Crete. And I would like to welcome you to this initiative that we had with some people from other countries. Our association is Piliko, and together with Rachovica's low-tech campus from Bulgaria, Ako Architecture, Kilometro Zero, Italy, and Vaha Virtual Architecture Handicraft Art in Italy. We have decided to do online debates on architecture, environment, and cooperation. And all this, of course, came out from our mandatory or voluntary, for some cases it is voluntary, lockdowns that we were trapped into flats and houses all over the world. So that was a challenge for a living space, and then an idea that at the same time the wide synchrony provides opportunities to start a collective reflection on the way we use how to live inside places. So Space Talks is thought as a hub, so to say, to exchange knowledge and sharing across Europe. Every week, two experts and one moderator will debate on issues of contemporary architecture, environment and technology, as well as some international cooperation gathered under the topics home, tools and together. So homes means that include all the issues that have to do with the direct dimension with the places we live in, including the impacts in our private choices that can have on society or environment. Tools refers to all these discussions that imply technological innovations or paradigmatic changes in the way that we do things, and of course together highlights all the social dimension that of how we shape our common space and which processes of production, decision making, or all the social interaction are replied in this. I would like to welcome you today on our first episode, and we have two interesting and young guests, Anna Sundman and Filka Sekulova. Anna Sundman is one architect from Sweden, and Filka Sekulova is a psychologist and ecological economist from Bulgaria. She lives in Spain, and the topic that we are talking about today is the living indoor, a new domestic dimension. Hello, Anna. Hi, Filka.
Hello.
Welcome, and thank you very much for replying to our invite to this initiative. I would like to leave you talk about yourself. First of all, about your interests and your specific research or interest items. Please, Anna, can you tell us about you?
Yes, thank you so much for inviting me to this interesting topic. My name is Anna Sundman. I'm an architect in Stockholm, Sweden. And I'm the co-founder of an architectural practice called Theory into Practice. And we work mainly in housing and urban planning, looking at new ways to formulate how we can utilize our resources in better ways, finding more innovative approaches to redesign our built environment to better suit our needs. I'm also the co-founder of Architectural Environmental Strategies, an NGO based here in Sweden, and also as a part member of Building Impact Zero Network, which I think connected us together through Acapat Zero.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And Filka?
Hello, Zeta, and thanks everyone for being there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're living in times when, well, kind of attending another webinar is not that easy. We're just so much over kind of flown with online events and talks. So it's really appreciative to know that we have people behind the screens out there listening in human bodies, you know. Mm-hmm. So yeah, about me. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at Universidad Autónoma de Barcelona. I'm kind of working on the issues that have to do with I'm mostly social scientist, so nothing to do with architecture. My track started with psychology, then moved on to economics, environment, ecological economics. Then I started studying happiness. Then I moved on to community-based initiatives, and now I'm recently looking into naturalizing urban landscapes. And it's a kind of research project called Naturvation. It's a Horizon 2020 project, what we're doing with let's say 6 other universities in Europe. And I am a member of, let's say, think tank, which is called Research and Degrowth, where we commonly think about defining degrowth and applying some of the principles behind that theory and practice and idea, more or less. This is shortly about me.
Okay, very nice. So all of us have lived all this last period lockdown. As we have said a little bit discussing between the three of us, some of us were mandatory and some of us voluntary lockdowns. So we have seen that, for example, in Sweden, the lockdown was not mandatory but voluntary. Can you explain us a little bit what it is, Anna?
Yes, here in Sweden, we've since the corona outbreak started, we've had more of a voluntary lockdown. We've been advised to reduce the amount of contacts and not making any unnecessary movements or travel. This has had a great effect on the society as a whole, with a lot of a reduction of our everyday life. Many people are secluded mostly to interact only with their closest family within the same household. Mm-hmm. However, there are workplaces where, like, you are still allowed, depending on the situation at your work and how it's organized. Mm-hmm. Depending on the size and the amount of people and the possibility to be distancing from each other. So everyone is to be advised to look over their own situation and what's possible within your own life and lifestyle to make the appropriate adjustments. But the government has not made any. Well, they've removed. We're not allowed to gather in larger groups, and they've made certain restrictions, but it's a little bit more. It's different in relationship to other European countries, as I understand it.
Yes. Filka, for example. Yes, Filka. What is the experience in Spain? That I think it's more common to our experience here in Greece, where mandatorily we have to stay home. No.
Yeah. Well, it's been pretty hard since, like, let's say, how was it, like 15th of March? People have been locked down in their homes, and that happened until and that carried on for almost, let's say, a bit less than 2 months. well, mostly children didn't have were not allowed to walk out of their homes. Pretty strict measures, apart from you're allowed to go to the shop, you're allowed to go to certain type of work that's really essential. We had, let's say, 2 or 3 weeks when only the workers in the essential industries could go and perform their duties. Let's say mostly agriculture sector, repair works, and care works. So it's kind of, I can't judge the adequacy of that measure, because like you can't really compare very well across countries. I think we're talking, and I think to an extent the type of measures that have applied in the Nordic and southern part of Europe have to do with have a cultural aspect. For me, so voluntary social distancing is much more easy to introduce in Sweden, because this culture there is different in terms of gathering, touching each other, maintaining the physical distance, while the Southern Europe is more about hugging and embracing and hanging out in big groups a lot. And it's so that creates the perfect conditions for spreading virus. And so it's of course, it's just one hypothetical explanation that I have in my mind, and it's not based by science in any kind of way. But so in a sense, perhaps southern countries needed a bit more stricter measures and some sort of police enforcement in order to really voluntarily distance, because this means rejecting the type of culture, type of lifestyle that you're having. But of course, on the other hand, it's these measures have been really hard. And this is what actually inspired me to start, let's say, a survey on the state of emotional well-being of people during the confinement period. And a lot of interesting things come out, but I'll talk about it later.
Yes, so even if it is the one way or the other, the sure is that the personal and the family life, studying and working together, and all this activity has suddenly happened inside our houses. Okay, so I would really like to come on some more details about this, because some psychological terms have occurred that are different in living indoor for long periods than in the past, of course. And I would like to hear a little bit from you. How can this affect the meaning of being home? Because home used to be our shelter. Home used to be something that we were keeping us protected from other things, from other people. And now this is a little bit different. Okay. Of course, the private and the common have been somehow come together in our homes. So the question is, which are the psychological terms that occur in living indoor for long periods? And how can we define the relationship of private and common in our houses after all this period, and the needs that occur in the living space? Anna, would you like to have your ideas about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can see, during this crisis, I think we can see that we require a lot more of our homes now. And I think we can see that it is, at least in Sweden, it's become very aware of the resources you have available in your home. Where most people have, if you've been able to work from home, this has been the preferred choice for many. And this requires this distancing from noise in order to be able to attend meetings. So we've seen how homes are used in a different way than before. But it also becomes, it sort of shines a bit of light on the need for having designed a living space that it's capable of handling multiple functions going on at the same time, finding enough space for different activities to happen at the same time. I think these are some things we've known before, but I think it's become more, we've become more aware of it during these crises, where we see, we notice more which resources each person is available to, and it's become more of and opening up to seeing people's more intimate spaces being shown in work meetings. So this is I think this has also shifted a perspective of how we perhaps could view each other, and also the living spaces that we have access to. And this is a discussion I think is very much welcome, because I think it addresses the core issues in architecture as well, of how to create living spaces that really contribute to ease people's lives, and to have a good access, like in Sweden, access to daylight, for example, the access of that your home has sufficient daylight is a key factor. And this is obviously something that's been slowly changing as this urban pressure of making smaller homes to sell more. I mean, you can now see apartments that are not really designed for spending the entire day at home. So this is really, I think, highlighting this need for what architects also need to provide in order to be able to spend that amount of time in these spaces.
So you think that, for example, all the housing types that we have now are suitable for the actual families that have been created all through this? And if not, which do you think are the features that are missing for having the suitable types?
Yeah. From a Swedish perspective, I could see that we've kind of gotten a little bit stuck in the nuclear family and modernism, and planned very. The planning is kind of centered that there is a home, and then there's a workplace that you leave to go to. And if we're now thinking more in flexible terms on how we use spaces, or whether we work from home, or people are even starting to mention that there's a lot of aspects that they prefer. Perhaps you need to work more. Most people could reconstruct their lives to be also working more from home. And what would that then require from that space? I think today we would need to break free and rethink some of those models that we've been introduced to, and also to look at more on how shared space could be within the home. Basically, how perhaps we have a certain amount of private, intimate, private space, but perhaps more shared space that is possible to share in a larger group, not necessarily just within the apartment. Different co-housing, co-living situations, I think, would be very interesting in looking at how to redistribute space and make resources more available in the close local community.
Okay, so not only in our own homes, but in many houses and in a group of houses, you mean?
Yeah, I think it could be an interesting development, seeing how spaces could be utilized, and more flexible spaces, basically closer to home. I think there is a bigger discussion going on and a bigger interest in these issues. It was also before the crisis, but I think even now we're seeing how to make spaces available and also affordable then. And obviously sharing is one thing that makes it more accessible and affordable.
Okay. A small pause. I would like to say to our audience that if they want, they can write on the chat room of YouTube any question that they want to ask to our guests. And at the end of our conversation, we're going to do these questions to our guests. So, Filka, what is your opinion about all this issue? How the private and common in our houses has changed, and how is the new house probably in which way it goes?
Well, so many things to say. I very much agree with Anna that we have definitely become very much in terms with with the resources of our homes. But still, I would say that it's very difficult to perceive the phenomenon of staying indoors as separate from the sense of insecurity and fear that the health pandemics has actually brought about. So it's kind of very different to stay at home out of voluntary reasons, and very different, or rather than just staying out of pleasure. So one is to do it by obligation and by fear, and the other one is to do it by pleasure. So it's kind of, and this makes me that I think I need to depart from the idea that staying at home it's mostly a privileged position, because like a big part of them, well, certain fraction of the population, those who don't have safe and comfortable homes, those that live in spaces with, let's say, house violence or with oppressive members of the household, or those who work in the kind of, let's say, in supermarkets or in the essential industries and cleaning streets, etc. Those who are very much on the front line of the COVID are not the ones who could afford themselves to stay at home. Let's say the middle class is the one that's having the privilege, the one could actually, the service economy that could actually work online is the one who could stay at home. So I mean, I would still say, okay, let's also kind of consider that, and it's that there is a big part of the population that we're forgetting about when we talk about staying at home and the meaning of home, and the meaning of home, especially so in the sense of small house would still be preferable for someone who doesn't have a home at all, right? So it's kind of it's good to consider that. But anyhow, what I've in this survey that we just mentioned on how people are living, how people have been experiencing the confinement, you could see a very big difference in the people who have access to nature, let's say, because like there's people, responses from Spain, responses from the United States, responses from England, responses from, let's say, Bulgaria and Germany. And you could see that emotional well-being and the kind of sense of home of the people who have access to garden, who have been able to walk and have kind of direct contact with certain type of physical activities outside, are doing much better. So let's say integrating the green or the nature in our concept of home is influencing very strongly our perceived sense of well-being, rather than the people who have been confined in their flats, even though they kind of have the flats be having a terrace with lots of plants and enough daylight and spaces for co-working. Still, these are the people that have been much more affected by the confinement. So yeah, indeed, I don't know up to what extent the sense of home could be appeased by architectural solutions, but rather, let's say, by rethinking the way we live. So let's say I live in a kind of something like a co-housing where we are five households sharing a house, each of us having our own apartment within this house, but we share gardens, we share forests, we share animals, and we are kind of like a little sub-unit, and we can keep on interacting among each other. So you could see how our well-being is kind of the way we've been living all this heavy confinement in Spain is completely different, and we have been so much more privileged than the rest. And then we're wondering, couldn't we start thinking about creating homes very much based on more shared spaces? Let's say shared spaces for working, because working from home means also kind of being able to disconnect from the large volume of reproductive work that most of us are having. Let's say being able to concentrate when you hear your children screaming next door, being able to disconnect from all the stuff that's going on in the household emotionally and physically. So how do you do that? Perhaps if we move into kind of a concept of housing which is based on not so much on, as Anna was saying, on mononuclear families, but rather on grouping kind of individuals with their kind of separate apartments, with shared spaces for gardening, shared spaces for, let's say, for working. That would and still kind of that would create much more healthy atmosphere for working, because another result of the questionnaire has been that indeed working from home for some people who don't have such a big kind of care workload are feeling okay, and kind of finding quite a lot of time for personal reflection. But those who have the children on top of them, and who need to keep on cooking and providing for the needs of their children, or other people need to take care of, working from home is very difficult. So it's kind of, you need to also take that into account and see how actually keeping and working from home could be also quite a lot of a burden. Also, another issue is the common and the private. My sense is that the more we have the home model, the more we have been confined. You could see that the common has been shrinking and at some point almost disappearing. So the private is increasing, the need to defend your space from entering of other people. So it's kind of, we also have seen this phase of kind of the fear being out there. So the common is more the digital, the visual, the smiles that you share with people crossing along the streets, the walking on the sidewalks. But let's say the common spaces have lost their meanings. So I mean, I'm talking from the Spanish reality. So because there is kind of little that we can share with the others in times of confinement, and in post-confinement share, it's difficult to come back to this type of sharing of the space that we have before because of the danger of infection and reinfection. So in that sense, I really think that architecturally we really need to think of co-housing more seriously and promote that kind of model where different units come together and have shared spaces as well, and think about the common in a different space, in the common as kind of a shared resources and shared access to nature, and that's because that's key for the home feeling.
Mm-hmm. Okay, you have reached the item more in a more sensitive way or sentimental way, I think. Anyway, we have created in this ultimate time work groups, which means, okay, we work from home. We have created new ways of relating to work groups, though, leaders or clients. And this is a challenge, of course, and an opportunity of honor, though it's something to think about, how our working relationships will change and how all this can come to a new balance, so to say. And my question is, how and to which extent must our homes react to this evolution? What do you consider important to maintain from the past and to pass to the future? And what do you suggest should change for a better living? And of course, which reflections can be made on the way we work? Can some of the experience of sharing the places for different functions while being less connected reflect to the way that we will or should work in the next future? What is your idea of how the work will change and how the houses are going to be changed because of that? Anna, would you like to tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, that's. I think. I think a little bit that I touched upon it before. I think we'll have to rethink a lot of systems that we've taken for granted, and I think this crisis can open up for new ways of looking at it, because now we're finding ourselves in a new system and having to redefine what brings us value. How do we solve things? I probably didn't mention before, but also that this, for example, in Sweden right now, the schools are still operating. So children are going to school in Sweden up to the age of 16. So certain aspects are maintained within society to also, in a way, relieve the pressure of otherwise having also to restructure your life entirely to be able to meet the needs of your children. So this is also perhaps a little bit different. It's online for older children, but it's for children under the age of 16. The schools are still open in Sweden. So this can also be a little bit different from the perspective of what we're experiencing here. as the children do leave the home to go to school. But yeah, I think the home. I'm almost inclined to say also it becomes a little bit more blurred, that we need to look at the living environment as a whole, and whether it is that we leave to go to work, or whether work is also being done at home for certain groups of society. I think this will have an impact. I think also as Filka mentioned, with the green spaces are becoming more important, connecting green spaces close to home. We've seen how work breaks now are also walking around your house and coming back in, and certain things I think kind of starts to shift in our mind as well, of what we're expecting from our close home environment. And I mean, it's too early to say what we will bring with us, but I think thinking of this time as a time of reflection and really reconsidering on how we can transform things that we find brings us more value, that we think gives us as human a better base to function from. I think this will be a very interesting point of redefining what ideas we can bring and merge into a new system, sort of altering a system that we thought were very locked in. And these last couple of months has shown us that this crisis has forced us to change the system. So I'm looking quite hopeful on people gathering good experiences that then can be molded into how we want to redefine and redefine our spaces around us.
Okay, well, very, very different approach in Sweden, of course, from other countries. In Greece, for example, and I think also in Spain, the small children were locked as first. The schools have been closed, and all our life has changed from one day to the other. Filka, I would like you to tell us a little bit about this, because okay, the children are part of our lives, of course, and this is a very difficult and interesting work has occurred in how we can manage working and growing children inside the home from now on. And how can we cover the needs of our children, and how can we cover and continue working in such a situation, and probably also in the next months or in the future? Would you like to tell us about like that?
I would somehow a little bit go back to the question of work, perhaps, if you don't mind.
Yes, of course.
So just a kind of few things about what are the basic takeaways of the way work has changed. So again, from the survey that I think I could see what the people mostly appreciative of. And one of the things that people report to be most appreciative of is the fact that they have stopped commuting so much. And that has liberated them a lot more time. And somehow there is a sense of slowing down. And there is indeed this kind of something that we talk about a lot in degrowth theory, the need to slow down and the need to deaccelerate all our working rhythms, because that's not bringing us much more well-being somehow. That's not making us happier. The more hours we work, the more stressed we are, the less time we have to relate with others, the less time we have for meaningful activities, and the more likely we are to have kind of emotional issues like depression or health issues. So in that sense, kind of work, the positive thing about like working from home is that like we have a little bit more time, like you liberate time from commuting, and this sense of slowing down that many people have sensed. This is something new, kind of that all of a sudden has come about, and that has opened the space for newer types of new ways of relatedness, new ways of kind of deeper type of conversations, time for self-reflection, time for conversation, also kind of staying at home with the children indeed. But that means that you could start to get to know your children a little bit better, because when you think about that, you're just like sending them off in the morning, bringing them back in the evening, and you're not spending the entire day together for a whole month or 2 months. And now you're spending, somehow you start to understand who they are, because most of the time we somehow extrapolate the education of our children to others, and we trust them that they're going to do a good job. And that's most of the cases working well. But it's interesting to be trapped with your children and somehow see them through your eyes, and you reveal something very interesting, and you see something that you haven't seen before about how they are, how they kind of respond to certain type of realities. And on the issues of children, I don't know, like for me, the experience here has been that you don't really have to get too obsessed about taking care of your children, but like try to keep a good internal balance. Let's say if you're fine with yourself and kind of taking care of yourself, taking care of your resources, you're going to be able to take care of your children as well. But you feel kind of overstretched between work stress, between fear of contagion, between taking care of your kind of relatives and other engagements, and on top of all, cleaning and taking care of the children. I think we're just like failing down, and that reflects a lot our sense of personal disturbances, also kind of reflecting a lot on the well-being of our children. And something else I also kind of, just one more point, and I just remember that looking at along my notes on the issue of work and the issue of suddenly with the confinement, we have put together the reproductive and the productive work, and we have seen which are the most essential factors of society, what is the most essential for each of us. And you could see how suddenly these jobs that are underappreciated before, which have to do with care for the elders, with kind of, let's say, educating children, with growing food, with distributing food, with selling food in the supermarkets, etc., with cleaning the streets, are the ones that kind of really keep our
not being able to safeguard them in this crisis. So I think it also reflects a bit on the idea we had on how your life journey with your home, when you are the most vulnerable, becoming quite old and not capable of looking after yourself, the homes we've now provided have turned out not to be as safe as we had hoped. The number of staff going through has been one cause of why people have fallen ill and not been able to survive this virus. So I think here it's also kind of rethinking the whole structure of the home and how to organize it. I think the most positive ways that we've seen are the co-housing alternatives for elders, where it's a more long-term commitment that you are becoming increasingly more active when you are stimulated in a co-housing situation. So although the co-housing initiatives that I'm aware of in Sweden with elders living, they have now closed the communal dinners that they normally have. But I would still, although this is a temporal decision, I think they're better off in terms of finding this kind of strength together and socializing perhaps in their garden, still being in some sort of context with other elders. I think I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Well, I think that we have to. Okay, good. Okay, I would like you to hear also something from Filka about this, and we have to finish somehow our topic. We have some questions, but we don't have very much time, unfortunately. So, Filka, would you like to say your opinion as well on this?
Well, I very much agree with Anna. My sense is that, like, this crisis has shown very clearly that the way we feel we have alienated our society from the elderly, how we kind of have secluded ourselves from the elderly, and how sad this kind of and kind of what is the real kind of cost of that in a sense. So because the current residential homes mostly look like hospitals, and the way elderly are like situated in there, well, the elderly homes that I kind of seen around mostly in Southern Europe. So it makes me think about how can we, because like a society whose elders are actually amputated and kind of put in a satellite and visited once every 2 weeks, is kind of a society which is losing part of its body, part of its brain, part of its memory. And and somehow I'm like in our reality, I'm kind of really missing in our lives, day-to-day lives, I'm missing the connection with the elderly. And I'm more and more kind of realizing that that's kind of depriving us as well as them from this type of diversity. So we need to think of ways to reintegrate the kind of the elderly in our day to day. And so for example, I'm one of the projects for co-housing here in Spain, where kind of group kind of aim to is building up is buying together an old factory. They're planning to separate that factory in 2 buildings. One is going to be for the co-housing families, another one is going to be for residential buildings for elderly people, where indeed elderlies have their own spaces and still kind of have are still kind of autonomous residents of their own space, and are not like treated as a kind of a client of patients in a hospital, and have a bit more personal sense of the space, and somehow feel that they contribute to the day-to-day realities. There are kind of many beautiful also examples of the putting kindergarten together with the residential homes, but of course in kind of a context of COVID crisis, that's kind of not the most optimal. So I would leave it here and say only that we need to think of ways to reintegrate the elderly in our day-to-day and see how we could bring them in our communities and not only keep them in residential homes, because that's sad. And actually we feel deeply how isolated they are right now, even more than anywhere, anytime more in the past.
Exactly. That was the point also of our discussion, how to make our lives and the lives of all age groups better in situations like this, and also in the future, of course. Our last question, so to say, somehow to have it everything together, is about the environment, and of course, and how can we have all the equilibrium of all this, which means what does it mean for the new domestic dimension of living indoor, environmental issues that can be handled from home. If COVID-19, for example, was the reason for today's lockdown, is a side effect of mistreating the natural environment. Governments and people have to, more than ever, the obligation to change their behaviors into more ecological ways. Okay, so how can people participate in environmental protection by living and working inside their houses? Can this change the living space as well? What is your opinion about this?
I think one important thing that was mentioned earlier as well is I think travel and the way we have been transporting ourselves. I think we'll see a great improvement in terms of rethinking the transport system and just how what we need, and the sort of what's happened around in Stockholm is the micromobility has kind of taken over, because the travels are not so far now, and this I think is very hopeful, as travel is a big emitter of greenhouse gases. So I think that as an environmental aspect can have a big impact on changing whether we find ways of also rethinking this part of sort of from travel from your home to travel to somewhere else. Other than that, I mean, I also think that finding another way of redistributing our resources and what's available to us will also be a way of also sharing those resources more wisely. So I think, again, co-living and co-housing are interesting alternatives in sharing certain types of spaces and also making use of spaces different times during the day. So more flexible use could also be seen in Sweden. It's a big cost of obviously heating, and then it's very resource efficient if that space is being used more than just a certain number of hours for one specific task. So this could be quite interesting, I think, to bring forward in redefining systems after COVID-19 crisis is over. I'm hoping.
Of course, yes. And do you agree, Filka, with that? What is your opinion about this environment?
I would agree that it might involve that it might create some certain reduction in energy consumption, especially transport in terms of other kind of, let's say, electricity. Another thing is like some people have been talking about like kind of high level of simplicity. Like the more you stay home, they realize that you don't need so much. So it's interesting to see how this moment of let's say confinement for many people has involved a certain type of personal reflection on what they need for life, what they need for good life, and how little actually they need for good life. So you could see how a number of people have started talking and thinking about living more simply and living with less, which is kind of baseline. On the other hand, we cannot believe that environmental revolution is going to happen only on the individual, but by kind of behavioral shifts. And one fear that, let's say, environmental movements are having right now, that just like keeping the environmental social struggles indoors implies leaving more space to the techno fixes and techno solutions and online forums, but offers little space for kind of social mobilizations, for social encounters, for social manifestations, for socio-political action. That's actually has been quite big drive for social change. So it's kind of, so we need to kind of see how the right of larger scale political meetings and manifestations and the right to protest is actually gonna be kept and defended as a basic way of changing the system. So in that sense, I would say, we could have certain hopes on living indoors, but we should also kind of see whether our, let's say, capacity to be not so disciplined in terms of sticking to the rules and organize in most subversive ways to the current neoliberal capitalist system, which needs to be disrupted for the health pandemics to decrease as well. So for that, we need large-scale political mobilizations and also face-to-face meetings. And I don't think we need to live in the illusion that just staying inside a house will change the system a lot. And for online platforms only, we need also kind of physical action. And I'm not sure how that's going to happen. But okay, that's kind of, we need let's leave also kind of, let's know that we don't have all the questions, we don't have all the answers, and there's a lot of kind of issues to be resolved out there. Yeah.
So one last question, mine questions, and then we have two others from our audience that I will ask you. The question is, so can finally the house be the new base of the 21st century revolution for a better life? Because all the revolutions for something better happen outside, and now sometimes we think that everything has to be inside the family, inside the house, inside a small or in ourselves. So what do you think about that? Can it be? Probably. Anna?
Yeah, I think it can be. I think it's a good place to start. Yes.
Filka?
Well, I would say one of the elements of the revolution, but only one. We need many others, and especially if the house is built on empathy and mutuality and sharing, right? Houses that are based on, let's say, closedness, which are which are based on fear of difference and fear of different ethnicities, fear of different cultures, and based on individualism and based on kind of defending my own rights, defending my own space, defending my own rights to consume and be healthy without thinking of the other, are not going to be part of the revolution. So it's kind of, we need to kind of see and reconsider our homes as homes that are also open for empathy and solidarity,
Okay. So I would like to ask also one question from our audience. Which are the activities that we are used to do in our homes, and which could best offer opportunities for community buildings at different scales, brought beyond the threshold of our homes? What do you think? So which are the activities that we are used to do in our homes, and which could best offer opportunities for community buildings?
I would say in a state of confinement, it's very difficult. I would say in a state of confinement, when we avoid meeting with others, it's not so easy to build communities. But still, there's multiple initiatives that you could do from your homes. That, for example, in our neighborhood, we started let's say, WhatsApp group with all our neighbors to know how they're doing and whether they need certain type of support, whether they need something to be bought, or whether they kind of need to be delivered some particular item, or whether they find physically. So in that sense, little steps like that in terms of getting in touch with your immediate environment and knowing how those around you are doing, including those people with whom you never speak. So that's one first step, and you could do that with existing technology. But still, for community building, you need kind of also you need commons. You need to kind of think about your common work and common spaces, and these spaces sometimes involve physical encounter at some point, and building these common spaces, it's fundamental for community building. Let's say starting a common garden, kind of getting your chicken together. Of course, that's more for our village kind of neighborhood, but let's say activities where you could offer food to each other, that's kind of in a distant way, and many multiple other, like creating kind of parties or singing songs from each other's balconies, and multiple others. This is endless conversation actually about how you can start a community.
That's in fact. There was also another question. We will answer it shortly, because there is another episode, episode number 4, on June 2nd, about comfort, climate, and indoor health. And the question was, what about indoor pollution and salubrity indoor? So somehow, and how is the climate inside our homes with all this situation? Do you want Anna talk a little bit about this shortly?
Yeah, no, I can definitely see how it puts a different pressure on our homes to just be home, for multiple people to be home working all day. Like, you're looking at what the ventilation is dimensioned for, or what I mentioned before as well, like the access to daylight is a big issue here in the more darker parts of the world, although it's getting lighter now, so that's good. But yeah, I think it does require us to think how those spaces are to be used, and how they are to be used. Also, like noise reduction and things like that, to be able to have these multiple activities to take place in the home. Yeah, it's a big topic that could be expanded on, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Okay. Well, I think unfortunately we have to close our conversation right now because it was very nice having you both in our topic, and thank you very much for contributing. Our next episode is going to be on Tuesday, and we are waiting you all again at 7 o'clock. And well, I hope you all enjoyed it. Have a nice evening, and till next time. Bye.
Thanks.